Okay, can you guys hear me all right? Yeah, you can hear me. I can hear myself. Should be able to hear me okay. All right. It's a little dark up here with these sunglasses on, but if I take them off, I won't be able to read anything, so just bear with me. I do my eye care through the VA, and you don't get your glasses on the same day, so. But they were very nice. It was actually a good eye appointment. My prescription did not change very much, so that's good. And like I said, they actually gave me a choice of more than 5 eyeglass frames this time, so I kind of teased them if they had any of those basic training glasses. You know, if you've ever been to any basic training boot camp, we call them a certain thing, I won't use that term, but, you know, ugly, yeah. All right, let's see. We've got lots of visitors here today, so here's what I want to do. I want us to take the next couple of minutes. I want you to get up out of your chairs, those of you who are regular attenders, and I want you to go introduce yourself to someone whom you have never seen in here before, okay? Or maybe you haven't seen in a long time. So let's do that, okay? And while we're doing that, I'm going to steal my wife's water glass because I didn't get one. Okay, I want to give you a quick ministry update on Nate and Becky Harder at Protectors Peak up in North Idaho. For those of you who do not know, that is a Christian guest ranch that serves first responders and military, and I happen to be on the board. So retreat season is pretty much drawn to a close this week. They finished it with a first responder ministry summit where they've had representatives from Billy Graham, organization, Navigators, First Responder Ministries, Wounded Warrior Project, I think, and others. A couple of different pastors that have top churches in big cities in the United States. And they had a summit where they were brainstorming. So I'll get to hear all about that this coming week, but that's pretty exciting that we got to have them host that up there at our ranch in Idaho. All right, so that's kind of our missionary update for the month. All right. Okay, where's my watercraft people? Who here has owned a boat at least one time? Like boat, canoe, anybody kayak, paddle boarders? Okay, pretty much everybody's owned a boat, right? Yeah, exactly. 2 best days in the boat owner's life: the day they buy the boat and the day they sell. Yeah, exactly.
Or give it away.
Yeah, been there, done. I bought and sold it. That's right. Dad and I did that one time when half on a boat. What a waste of money that was. You think we could catch fish in that thing? No. Should have stepped with a little 13-foot aluminum boat. Anyway, okay, so we've owned boats. Now, who here has ever been in a boat or a ship in a bad storm? It's kind of scary, isn't it, right? I mean, you feel real small when the waves are up over the boat. And then you're on top of the wave, and then you're in the trough, and you're back and forth in the rain and the wind, especially if you're out there at night. Right? It's hard to see. Okay? Imagine that you take, your little kayak out to Wicked Reservoir when it has water in it. Okay? That you go to Wicked Reservoir in the spring and you stay out there till dark and then a storm comes up and you're out in the middle of it and you got to try to get back. It can be pretty scary. Imagine what would happen if you were on this boat and to be in the storms, you can't see very far on the water at night in a storm. Imagine you're in this boat and you see this apparition. This person walking on the water next to your boat. What are you going to think? Right? Right? I think I'm seeing things or, something, right? I mean, I've been so tired, in my previous career, working nights, that I have seen things that probably weren't there, okay? Well, same thing happened to the disciples. Now I want you to imagine, so that's a physical thing. I want you to imagine, now, we don't even have to use our imaginations. I want you to think in your own personal history, and maybe it's occurring today, that a time of spiritual crisis for you. Someone once told me, in fact I've probably heard it a couple times, that at least 10% of people who walk into a church on any given Sunday or Saturday, if you're a Saturday churchgoer, are hurting inside. 10%, so that would be like 4 of you today. Perhaps there's death of a friend or a loved one. Discord in the family. Maybe there's church disagreements going on. A lot of us have been through those things before. Perhaps you've got failing health. Perhaps your finances aren't what they used to be. Or maybe you just feel like God is not watching. And I'm not going to say it's okay to feel that way, but it's not unusual or abnormal. Because I get into those times of life too. Even as a pastor, sometimes I wonder if God is present or if God is watching. Sometimes I come to a time of, I would call it spiritual crisis. And it's not unusual. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at Matthew chapter 14, a portion of it, where Jesus walks on the water. So we'll be in Matthew chapter 14 here in a minute. So just to set the scene for you, Jesus has fed the 5,000. Okay, the miraculous feeding, the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. That's all they got, and then disciples are trying to send them away so they can go buy their own dinner. And Jesus says, "You feed them," right? And they go like, "What? Here's all we got. It's sack lunch, right?" And Jesus takes that, blesses it, and miraculously expands that and feeds a whole lot of people. And then what happens is at least probably a fair number of those people, there then begins talk of, is this the prophet to come? Let's make him king now. Matthew doesn't record it, but one of the other Gospels does. So there's talk in this scene of making him king now, and it wasn't his time yet. And of course, they're going to make him a king in a way he wasn't going to be king at the time. And there's the sense that we get from all these passages on the feeding of the 5,000 and then Jesus walking on the Sea of Galilee, that the disciples may have been caught up in the hysteria of the moment. The disciples might have got caught up in the hysteria of the moment because what Jesus does is he sends them away without them. He separates them from the 5,000 plus crowd of people and says, "Get in the boat and go to the other side and I'll meet you over there." He takes them out of that situation and sends them away. And then Jesus goes up on a mountainside alone to pray. So the disciples are heading out across the Sea of Galilee. It's probably dusk, or evening time. I mean, they just fed these people dinner, right? So it's probably getting close to dark. Not a good time to be rowing across a big lake, really. Especially one that is prone to sudden violent storms. Like, how the wind can sometimes come up on Wikiup, like right now. Or up on East Lake. I've had that happen up there. Nice, and all of a sudden it's whitecaps, right? Same thing with climate. Sometimes it happens on the ocean too, right? So Jesus sends them away, and they're out, and they're going to go row across the Sea of Galilee. Jesus goes up by himself on a mountain to pray, just him and the Father. Now let's go to Matthew chapter 14. We'll take a look at verses 22 through 36. And immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he sent the multitudes away. And when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. Now when evening came, he was alone there. But the boat was now in the middle of the sea, tossed by the waves, for the wind was contrary. That's a good word. In other words, the wind was blowing in a direction you didn't want it to blow, right?
Yeah.
Have you ever been out like in a canoe? Canoes kind of sit sort of high in the water, and you get into the wind, and you're having a hard time steering it, make it go the way you want it to go. Been there. So I don't have a canoe anymore. Like, no, it's crazy. I want a motor. Okay? What's up with power? All right. Verse 25. Now in the 4th watch of the night, Jesus went to them, walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, "It is a ghost!" And they cried out for fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Be of good cheer. It is I. Do not be afraid." And Peter answered him and said, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." So he said, "Come." And when Peter had come down out of the boat, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw that the wind was boisterous, another good word, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, saying, Lord, save me! And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and caught him and said to him, Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt? And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. Then those who were in the boat came and worshipped him, saying, Truly you are the Son of God. And another gospel message says, when Jesus got in the boat and the wind ceased, they were immediately on the other shore. Okay? I'm not going to get into all that today. We're going to look at something very specific here. So first of all, the fourth watch. This is going off of Roman clock. Okay? In Hebrew or in the Jewish culture, they would have 3 watches of the night. If you had to, get up and do fire watch or something like that, or stand watch over your animals, they had 3. But the Romans had 4. So Matthew here is really kind of writing from, the Roman cultural perspective, okay? That's from 3 to 6 a.m. Now, how many former night shift or current night shift workers are in here? All right. I worked a lot of night shifts, sometimes till 5 a.m., sometimes till 7 a.m., sometimes beyond that. You got hills over, got overtime, right? And you probably, just go like gangbusters for the first several hours. But around 3 a.m. when things start to get quiet. So if you worked in an emergency room, usually it starts to kind of, wane off after, bars are closed. Gets a little quieter sometimes. Same thing in law enforcement, gets a little quieter, whatever, on night shift, sometimes it gets a little quieter. And you start to get a little sleepy, don't you? Especially right at about sunrise. When the sun starts to come up, the eyelids start to come down. Right? That's why the military has what they call stand to. Everybody on the line's got to wake up for that hour before sunrise, because that's when the enemy might attack, right? Everybody stay awake. So 3 to 6 a.m. The disciples have already been on the lake several hours. Because it says, when evening came, Jesus was alone on the mountain and the boat was in the middle of the sea. So however you classify evening, I don't classify 3 to 6 a.m. evening anymore. Right? That's 0 dark 30. Right? I call it that's kind of the witching hours for wildlife to start moving again. That's sleepy time. All right? That's sleepy time. They've been out there on the lake trying to row against the wind. They're tuckered out. They're tired. And they're getting nowhere. They're like in that canoe out there in the wind, just kind of going in circles, right? You try to go one way and all of a sudden it turns and goes, it goes too far and they're struggling. Okay? They're out in the middle of nowhere. And you know what Jesus does? He lets them struggle for a while. He doesn't just go out in the middle of the night. Okay? It says that the boat was in the middle of the sea, tossed by the waves, for the wind was contrary at evening time. And then between 3 and 6 a.m. Jesus goes out. So they're out rowing all night. They're pulling first and second and third watch, right? Trying to get this boat over to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, and it's not working. Okay? Jesus lets them struggle. I wonder what they're thinking in that boat before Jesus arrives, right? We know what they think after he shows up, right? What are they thinking? Are they grumbling? Well, if Jesus had been here, he would fix this, right? Maybe they said that. Do we ever say that? I've said that. Where were you? Where were you, Jesus? Where were you, God, when this happened? I've said those things, and I bet you a bunch of you have too. I'm sure the disciples did. Jesus lets them struggle, and sometimes he lets us struggle. He doesn't always just show up and fix things immediately, right? Sometimes he lets us struggle. Romans 5, 3 and 4 says, and not only that, but we also glory in tribulations, knowing that tribulation produces perseverance, and perseverance character, and character hope. Sometimes we need to struggle. It's a fact of life. Not everything's going to go our way, right? I mean, if everything went my way, I may not be here today. If everything went my way, I would own my own island, and it would just be me and my wife. And sometimes the grandchildren, right? That'd be it. And we'd have want of nothing, right? And there'd be no cell phone, no internet either. So, if I had my own way in everything, and if everything worked out exactly the way I wanted, it may not have turned out so well for me. Okay? So we need those struggles. We need those tough times, I think, really to put us in our place. And to remind us who's really in charge. Because when I get my way, I think I'm in charge, right? Well, if I was king, it would all be different. So Jesus lets them struggle, and he lets us struggle. And Paul recognizes that when he writes this in Romans. We can glory in those troubling times, right? In tribulation, if you want to call it that. Because tough times produce perseverance. And perseverance produces character, and character hope. How many military veterans are in here? Fair number. Okay. So after either you enlisted or got drafted, or maybe you were an officer and you went to, service academy or something, I don't know. You had to go through some training, didn't you? Called basic training or boot camp. Was it easy? Okay. Anybody here go in the Air Force? Any Air Force veterans? Okay. We can tease the Air Force, because I did a little Air Force time after my Army time. I think their basic training might have been easier than mine. But it wasn't that easy, was it? Although I remember my cousin telling me, so my cousin and I are about 2 years apart, and I had done the Army thing, and then he went into the Air Force after high school, and he told me, yeah, they made us do 10 push-ups at a time. I'm like, 10? That's not even an appetizer in push-up talk. That's not even one cheese stick. I mean, it's like, really? I remember being told to do push-ups until the drill sergeant was tired of hearing me yell out 1 drill sergeant, 2 drill sergeant. That was a lot. I remember doing 175 squat thrusts at one time because I got in trouble with a West Point cadet who was there to help us with basic training this summer. Really? It's a good thing I was 17, right? You could do those kind of things. But there's a reason that training is difficult. It's not just to, take the civilian out of you, right? It's not just to, make you a team player, so to speak. It's because, A, it makes you physically stronger, but it also makes you mentally stronger. The harder you train, the easier it is to accomplish your mission, correct? The more lazy you are with your training, and the more you slack off on training and try to get out of training, the worse off you are when it comes to accomplishing whatever your mission is. Same thing for us. We need that training, and training isn't just a one-shot deal. Yeah, I went to basic training, I did my thing, and guess what? The next year I went and got training again, and then I got hurt. So I had to go do that whole training cycle, all 8 weeks of it, again. Yeah. You know exactly the term. Nobody wants to get recycled, but when you break a leg, you're kind of stuck with it. But I was very trained by the end of that one, right? I've done infantry AIT twice. Just about 8 months apart. And guess what? I wasn't done. Then I had to go through, leadership training, little NCO schools, and then officer candidate school, and this school, and that school. I'm so sick and tired of training. Can't I just go do my thing, right? But then I got smarter. And I took a break in service. And I went to the Air National Guard, because they don't have to march anywhere, generally. And they don't sleep in holes in the ground. But guess what we did all the time? Training. Train. And then 9/11 happened, and guess what? We didn't get training anymore. We did mission after mission after mission. Well, we did some training, right? But not nearly to the extent we should have. And all those difficult, nights out in the field and, carrying that rucksack. Well, the Air Force didn't carry rucksacks except for certain jobs, but, the Army training, right? All that Army training came back in those Air Force missions, and it was good. It was good, right? Well, it wasn't good, but it worked out fine, right? So all that difficulty and all that trial and tribulation and hard work and lack of sleep and lack of food and getting yelled at and carrying the world on your back and all that stuff paid off in the long run. Same thing happens spiritually. Tough times produce what? There's a phrase out there. Tough times produce tough or strong, right? Easy times produce weak. Well, we need those tough times. So don't think that you're alone, because you're not alone if you're going through tough times. And don't think that if you're questioning where's God or what's God doing, that that's an abnormal or an improper thing to do, because the disciples are going to do it too. But let's take a look at what Jesus does. So Jesus watches them, and then he goes out to them. Again, between 3 and 6 a.m. when they're getting tired, they're sleepy, right? They're out of energy. There's a storm raging around them. They're probably bailing water out of the boat with their coffee can. Well, they don't have coffee cans. Whatever they use. Bail a boat bucket. Old wine bag or something. I don't know what they're using. They're bailing the boat. And Jesus literally walks not just on the water, but he's walking on the storm. I mean, it's a miracle to walk on water when it's flat, right? But he's walking on a storm. It's something sure to drown any of us. If any of us tried to get out of the boat to try to walk on the water without Jesus being there to catch us, we're going to drown. Okay? So he's out there with us. Maybe it seems like he's afar off watching, but eventually he's going to arrive. He's right there with us through cancer. We've had cancer in this congregation, and we still do, right? And we've lost friends to cancer. We've seen, pretty much like, miraculous recoveries of cancer, but he's there through cancer, through the treatments. He's there if you're living in an abusive situation. He's there if you've got financial trouble, if you've lost your job or your job just doesn't pay enough. He's even there at the time of death, and he's been through that one too, by the way. So Jesus is there. He doesn't just walk on the water, he's walking on top of the storm. He's right there in the exact same conditions that the disciples are in. And he's been there in the same conditions you're in, somewhat, and he's there with you in those same conditions. Now let's take a look at Peter. So you got Jesus is over here. He's walking on the water. They think he's a ghost. That's a natural reaction. We can't blame the disciples for thinking Jesus is a ghost. They can't recognize him at 3 in the morning anyway, right? In a storm. It's not normal to see someone walking on top of the water. Now, if he came swimming by, right? You're swimming by. I don't know how Jesus would swim. I don't swim very well, so don't take my hand motions into account. All right. I can swim if it's salt water, and I can just backfloat. I swim pretty good. I sink like a rock otherwise. They're not to be blamed. But you got Peter. Now, sometimes people like to bag on Peter in this story. I don't think that's right either. Peter at least got out of the boat, didn't he? I mean, at least he had enough faith to ask, if it's you, call me to you. So what does Jesus say? Come on, let's go. Right? And Peter actually gets out of the boat. Did the other 11 disciples do that? All right, so let's not hammer on Peter too much here. At least he got out. At least he took a step of faith, right? Out of that boat. I'm guessing what he did is he probably climbed out of the boat and he's probably hanging on. Like, okay. Looking at the boat, looking at Jesus, right? And he probably went like this. And went, ooh, look at this. I'm walking. But then what does he do? He does exactly what the rest of us are going to do, right? Okay, the waves are crashing over his head. It's raining probably. The wind's howling. And instead of looking at Jesus, he kind of looks around and goes, uh-oh, I am walking on the water. That's not natural. That's not normal. And what does he do? He starts to sink. But at least he did get out of the boat. He starts to think, he thinks he's going to drown. We do the same things. When we get that bad news, when the doctor calls us and says, I think you need to come in and sit down and talk to me, but bring your spouse with you too. That's not a good conversation for you to have with your doctor over the phone. Hopefully they don't tell you over the phone, oh, by the way, you got cancer, you're going to die in 3 days, or, Hopefully that's not a good call, right? And man, it's real easy to take your eyes off of Jesus and think only of that and think, this is it, I'm done. Listen, many of us in here have been there. Peter took his eyes off of Jesus. And when we take our eyes off of Jesus, like Peter, we begin to think or feel that we are drowning. Whether we're drowning in sorrow over the loss of a loved one, guess what, folks? You're all going to die someday. All going to die someday. All right? Unless Jesus comes back and gets us first. When we take our eyes off Jesus, we feel like we're drowning in sorrow. Peter took his eyes off Jesus and literally didn't think he was going to start to drown. I think Peter probably knows how to swim. He is a professional fisherman. That's like enlisting in the Navy and never learning to swim. That's why I went to the Army. Didn't think we had to swim until they threw me into a pool with all my gear on and told me to swim to the end of it. I got fished out of the pool with one of them big pool hooks. Floundering out there. Jesus was not standing on the diving board when that happened. He might have been there, in presence, but okay. We think oftentimes that we are drowning in sorrow, and that happens when we take our eyes off Jesus, and that's not an unusual thing to happen. So if you've done that, don't feel terribly guilty about it. Peter did it too, right? And what did Jesus do? Here's Peter, right? He's let go of the boat. He's starting to sink. He's doing the dog paddle or whatever he's doing, right? Trying to stay afloat. He starts to panic. Ever panicked in the water? Right? It's real easy to suck in a whole lot of water into your lungs when you're panicking, right? Panic breathing, right? But what does Peter do? Because he does the right thing. He cries out. He says, Lord, save me. Lord, save me. And what does Jesus do? Reaches out and grabs him by the hand. Says, I got him. Chastises him just a little bit. But I think Jesus knew he was going to do it. Jesus reaches out and physically saves Peter. He does the same thing to us spiritually. When we cry out to God, Lord, save me. Cure me of my addictions. Help me through this time. I don't know what I'm going to do without my wife or husband or whatever, right? My mother, my father. Lord, save me, my child has just died. This happens, doesn't it? Jesus does not ignore you. Jesus did not throw Peter a ring off the side of the boat, which they didn't have in those days, right? Or a personal flotation device, a square cushion. He doesn't throw him anything. He doesn't throw him and go, here, save yourself. He reached right out, grabbed Peter, and pulled him up out of the water. Helped hoist him in the boat. Because Peter was smart enough that he knew there was only one person that could save him from drowning, and that was Jesus. Peter, out in the water, did not turn around at his friends, the other 11 disciples, if they're all, I'm guessing all 11 were in there, right? We'll just guess they are. He did not turn around and say, hey, Andrew, that's his brother, throw me a line. Didn't do that. He called out to Jesus. Jesus is the one that saved him. Now, as a safety note for you, I do not want you to go out to the lake, okay, and try to walk on top of the water without somebody there to pull you back out, okay? You're gonna sink. You might be able to swim, but you're not gonna walk on top of the water, so don't try. But Peter cries out to Jesus. Jesus reaches out and pulls him up, and he does the same thing with us in life. When we cry out, Lord, save me, he does. So my question for us today, my question for you and for me, is are you crying out to him today? Are you crying out, Lord, save me? James 4:10 says, humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and he will lift you up. Peter had to humble himself because he figured he was going to drown. Jesus lifted him up out of the water. And when we humble ourselves in the sight of the Lord, he lifts us up. Are you crying out to him today? And give yourself to him. Surrender yourself. That's what Peter had to do. He had to surrender all control to Jesus. He started out with a little bit of faith. He started out by stepping out of the boat. And then it seemed like this was an impossible task, and he wasn't going to make it. And he took his eyes off that person that he first looked at. And he looked at his circumstances. And we may think he was a failure, but he wasn't. Because he humbled himself and he cried out, Lord, save me. And we can do the same thing. If we've stepped out of the boat, so to speak, if we're out there in the storm, the storms of life, because it happens to all of us, all we need to do is humble ourselves and let him lift us up. Let's pray. Father, again, thank you for this day. I thank you for each one here. We thank you for salvation in your Son, Jesus Christ. There's some things in life that only he can pull us up out of. So I just ask that each one of us has the humility to recognize that when those times in life come, and that we cry out to you, Lord, save me. In Jesus' name, amen.